Hey everybody, it's Don, and welcome to another edition of the Curious Inception vlog series. Be sure to like our Facebook fan page for Curious Inception so you don't miss any of these moving forward. Alright, so we're just going to jump right into it, and I think this is a place where a lot of people have been, and if you follow my personal Facebook page and you follow Curious Inception, you know I talk about it a lot. And one of the topics that comes up all the time is, does my employer value me? I mean, do they really value, appreciate you? Do you feel engaged at work? So I get this all the time, you know, talking to people and with some of the startups that we're working with right now. But, you know, a lot of people, they just don't feel appreciated. They don't feel value at work. But the first thing that I always kind of go to is, you know, it's a fork in the road. And are they a victim? You know, is it a victimization? Are they feeling, you know, sorry or one way about themselves, or is it actually true? You know, and there's a way to kind of figure that out, and we're going to go through some of these scenarios, and maybe at the end of this you can figure it out for yourself and figure out what your next steps are going to be. But the first thing I always start with that is, I always think, you know, inherently is it a point where they're a victim, or is this really true? Does the company not value them? But to kind of go to the root of what a company is there to make money. So you have to understand that a company is going to have its best interest at hand at all times. And there's a great documentary out there. It's pretty long, but it's called The Corporation, and it breaks down what a corporation truly is. It's almost like a living, breathing entity, and it will go at any length to survive and to make money. So if you have some time and you want to learn a little bit more about business and corporations, I mean, that's a great place to start. It's called The Corporation. So, you know, with that being said, is the company, they value the service that you provide. So you show up to work, you do a service, they value that service. And when you do a very good job, of course, they're going to value it even more. And in many cases, that's truly where the value starts and ends. Now, I'm not saying in all cases, I'm just saying in many cases, as long as you do a great job, that's all that they care about. So, you know, don't complain, that you don't cause it, you just come in, you do your work, that's what they care about. The minute that you begin to make noise or you become a troublemaker, that's when the value starts to lessen. So you have to take that into consideration. So when your value starts to go down, what do you think happens? Or if it's a service that you provide that's no longer needed, what do you think happens? And a great way to look at that is, I read a lot, and I read a lot about global business. And what I think was fascinating is reading an article, I think it was Inc. or Money, I don't know which magazine, but it was an article to where over in Japan, that life insurance companies are starting to use software to underwrite their files, to underwrite, you know, their processes. They have a software that is very efficient. And what's happened is it's led to people being laid off. We'll use that term for now. So with that being said, is the value of the service that they provided manually went down. So it was devalued. And so now they have the software that can do it, and you know the rest is history. So that's what's kind of happening, and that's going to continue to take place. Technology is going to take over, and you can see it everywhere that you go. Just look around you. Be observant, pay attention, read. You'll see technology is going to take over more and more. So let's get back to the subject at hand, though. And I love to do some stats. I always, when I do some research, I throw out some stats. So 85% of people polled worldwide dislike their job. Now I'm going to use dislike because some of the articles that I've kind of focused on said hate. But that's a pretty strong word. Let's just say dislike their job. The average person works 80,000 hours in their lifetime. So if you think about it, we're there at work a lot. And some of you work more than others, some less than others. Whatever it may be, you want to feel appreciated. You're there a lot. You're there so often. You want to feel valued. You want to feel be engaged. You want to have that loyalty, that bond, and that that you create with a company, and you're there a lot. And that's not even talking about commute time either, and we'll talk about that too. But 25% of workers say that their job is their number one cause of stress. And it can happen. There's some research out there when people have heart attacks, and I think it's on Mondays most of the time because it's stressful going back after the weekend. That 6 o'clock on a Sunday comes and you start to get that feeling and you're, oh shit, I got to go back to work. I got to deal with this asshole tomorrow. It's just one of those things. And Mondays, I think statistically, is a high percentage of heart attacks, especially in the workplace. But here's what's a really, really interesting statistic that I came across is 94% of workers in Japan that were polled did not feel engaged with their company. So they didn't feel engaged with their work. They didn't have that level of appreciation, and the suicide rate got so high that the government had to step in and intervene. That is the far extreme of anything that could happen, but it shows the level of value that we actually put into the companies that we work for, the jobs that we work for. We're putting a lot at stake in that. So what I mean is, why do we actually have to have their approval? Why do we have to put so much value in their appreciation? And so that's one of the things that I also look at too. So going back to the original, are they being a victim or is it true? Why do you actually have to have that? And some of these statistics, you might say, okay, Don, maybe you pulled them out of your ass. I don't know. That was a 2017 Gallup poll. And I take Gallup, their word as a pretty high indicator. It's a great level of what people are thinking. So what I'm getting at with a lot of that is the bottom line is whatever you feel at work, you have to appreciate and value yourself first. I understand that we want to feel valued and appreciated by the company that we work for because we're there a lot, and especially with the commute. But really, it's about value within yourself. And it's a good thing to try to practice being positive about everything that's going on, because once you know what your value is, you don't really need that. You don't need somebody else to substantiate and validate what you're feeling. And I think that's really important. So when you do value yourself, when you know your worth, it's just like any relationship, because working at a company, it's like a relationship. And when your value in your service starts to decline, the company might break up with you. That's just the hard facts of it. So when you have your self-worth is very high and you value yourself, you don't really need that from somebody else. You don't need the pat on the back. You don't need the great job, Johnny, good going. You really know what you're worth. And the other thing about it is, if the company breaks up with you, I'm just going to use that term. I think it's a very nice and fluffy, terminology to use. But if the company breaks up with you, you know your level of value when you go to another company and you're viewed as a higher commodity. So moving on from that, you don't need the validation that most people would need when you feel that comfortable and confident, in your abilities. Now, I was looking at, I love my documentaries. I watch a lot of documentaries, and there was one that just really resonated with me, and it was called Hard Times Lost on Long Island. And it was about the 2008 financial crisis. And it followed, and if you don't know what happened in 2008, there was a big financial crisis, specifically with the mortgage industry. A lot of companies, laid off a ton of people. There was just a lot of things going on, especially on Wall Street. So this was in Long Island, and it followed, I think, 10 to 12 people that lost their jobs. And we're talking about people that were a little bit older. They were anywhere between the ages of, I think the majority of them were anywhere between 45 and 50. There were a couple of, younger, like 35, 38, something like that. But these people were trying to find jobs. And in the midst of all this, it was just a really, really hard time for them. And it followed them throughout their journey. And it's really sad. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but it's a great find. But there were three common denominators with them. And the first one was they were all college educated. So if you think that you can, the college degree, this was back in 2009, 2010, something like that, and they were having a hard time finding a job, and they were all college educated. They all had tons of experience, so they had value for companies. They just had a wealth of knowledge in their industries. The second thing is they were loyal to their companies, and maybe, in a situation a little too loyal, and I hope to touch on that in a minute too. But the other third thing, and this was said, it was specifically said that I didn't have a plan B. So they had they had really nothing to fall back, like a lot of them had nothing to fall back on whatsoever. And to me, I talk about having a plan B all the time. This is actually why I do these vlog series, because it's important. So with that, I mean, they had a ton of education, wealth of knowledge, tons of experience, and like one of them, I think he was 46 or 47, he couldn't even get a part-time job driving a truck during the holidays for FedEx. And this was a guy that he worked on Wall Street, which is crazy. The other guy, one of them, he had been at the company almost 30 years. He was a vice president, and he walked in the one day and said, okay, so who are we laying off? And they gave him that look, and that look, was, oh shit, I'm getting laid off. And he was at $100,000 a year. He said he made it. It was like the American dream. And the American dream at one time was you go to college, you get a great career, you get married, you buy a house, all that, get a dog, have kids, like all those things. But now the dream has changed. Now you go to college and you have a mass amounts of debt, and then you just hope to be able to get a job at like Whole Foods. And, and that's talked about it. And these people, like, they had a really, really, really hard time finding a job. And, everyone feels safe until it happens to them. You feel good. You go to work, you put in a good, day's work and a lot of effort, but it's sometimes just not enough. It's not enough because, going back to originally, the one of the points that I made is a company is there to make money. And if it is a situation where they can use technology to do your job, it's going to happen. So some of does your employer listen to you? That's a value. In my experience, in my personal experience in the corporate world, is a lot of the times when, something was going to get rolled out, I would give my 2 cents, sometimes 3, but really the plan was already in place. I was just there to execute. And it almost made me feel many times where you were just trying to pacify me, as a senior manager, just to pacify me, to make me feel like I had some input. But I truly didn't have a lot of input. It was, we're going to move forward whether you like it or not. So, of course, I'm going to move forward. And I knew my value. I knew my plans for the future. And it came down to one day having to make a decision. And for me personally, I have always had a plan B. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about having a plan B. And I'm going to do it using the Burt Beveridge story. Hopefully you've heard of Burt Beveridge. I think you all have. So I'm just going to tell his story. And back in the 90s, Burt Beveridge, he was in the mortgage industry, and he was doing really well for himself. It was exploding. Things were great. Times were good. And he was just, everything was fantastic. So he had a side hustle. He had something that he was doing on the side just for friends and having some fun. And anyways, there was a mortgage collapse, and he found himself out of work. He found himself not being able to get a job. And so his side hustle was making a spirit. So he used to make a liquor. And he would go to, he figured out, what I'm going to do is what I've done for friends, giving them for gifts, making flavored, liquor. Maybe I can do this. And at one point he was watching a motivational speaker on TV, and the motivational speaker said, find the intersection of what you love to do and what you're good at. So he said, this is what I'm good at. I'm going to go into this. So he did. He went store to store, and no places were buying his liquor. No places wanted to stock his liquor. And he was just really frustrated. And one of the owners said, if you can figure out how to make a smooth vodka that the ladies will sip, then we can do business. And he said, well, how do I do that? And the owner said, I don't know, you figure that shit out. So I think it was like 19 or 20 different credit cards. He maxed out. He came up with $90,000. He was living in a shack, sleeping on the floor. I mean, he had no money. He was putting everything into this to actually succeed. There were some other really big, pitfalls that he had to overcome living in, I think it was Texas, where they didn't allow for a distillery, so he found a loophole. So he worked his ass off to really get his dream because he believed in it. And this was something that he did on the side, but he was actually turning this into a business. So he entered the San Francisco spirits competition just to get some exposure. He just wanted people to know about his brand. That's all he wanted. And he won. And it kind of, I guess, fucked him up, because within a year, he was profitable. It took off. And I think most of you know who Burt Beveridge is. You probably know his nickname, Tito. So that's Tito's Vodka and their story. And that's true, his last name is Beveridge. So with that is, he always had a plan B, even though he didn't know it at the time. So I think the company is worth like $2 billion now, which is fantastic. So great for Burt and Tito's. But, there comes a point where you got to figure out something that you're good at. But more importantly is, there are signs all around us that we may need to do something else. For me personally, I was seeing signs, and I took a leap of faith, just like Burt. Hopefully my story ends up like Burt. I really hope so. But there's signs all around us, and we just got to pay attention. And one of them, the first one is by one of my I would say a mentor, because I really, really like a lot of the things that he says, is Sir Richard Branson. And when something stops being fun, it may be time to move on. And this is a guy who has built a ton of companies, and he just sold Virgin Airlines to, I think it was Aloha or Alaska, and I don't know, I don't fly that much, but he now he's on to something new, cruise ships, and he's going to make the best cruise ships out there. So when you have no passion, no motivation, and you dread going into work, that's a sign. That's a sign that you need to, start to look at something different for yourself. The other thing is, does it impact your health? Does it affect your health? Anxiety, depression, those play a part in dreading and going into work. It affects your mental health, your cognitive ability of thinking. When it just kind of stresses you out to where you have ulcers, or one of the other big signs is losing your hair. You start losing patches of hair, and you end up bald like me. I mean, that's another sign of stress, and stress can impact your body in many negative manners. I didn't lose hair because of stress. I lost it because of bad genes. But, with that is, if it is playing a toll, if it's taking a toll and playing a part in your overall health and well-being, that's something that you got to look at, 100%. And the other thing is, do you vent too much? Do you complain incessantly about your coworkers, about your job, the company, just every little thing, your commute, the ride on the elevators take too long, whatever it may be? If you find yourself complaining a little bit too much, that's another sign. A job should provide more positive things than negative. especially when we work so much, and we go back to that 80,000 hours, and that doesn't even take into consideration our commute. And some people that I've known personally, an hour to an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours of commute time, upwards of that. I mean, so we're there a lot, and it should be a positive experience. So am I saying if you don't feel valued, you don't feel appreciated, you're not engaged at work, to quit? No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is to keep your eyes open for any opportunity of something that you may enjoy doing, so that way it can get you to a place where you feel good about what you're doing. And it might be a slow go. It might be something that does not happen overnight. But maybe you have a side business. Maybe it's photography. Maybe it's writing. I know bloggers making millions of dollars. And did it start off that way? No. It started off maybe as a weekend gig. But, create those side hustles until those side hustles can take off and they can become full-time opportunities for yourself. We all want to do something that we enjoy, that we love, but sometimes it's going to take something from you as well. What does that mean? Long days, long nights, working on the weekends. One of the other, heroes that I pay attention to is Gary Vaynerchuk. And throughout his 20s, he worked. Every weekend he worked. He did not enjoy his 20s like most people do, going to the clubs, going out to the bars, having fun, all that shit. He worked. Look where he is now. I mean, people want to be where Gary Vaynerchuk is now, but he had to sacrifice a lot in order to get there. And that's one of the things is, if you want something bad enough, I know it's so cliche, you will do whatever it takes to get it. But digging deeper into that is, we watch a lot of TV. We watch a lot of reality TV, and we want those lives. People watch the Kardashians. I don't know if they do anymore, but before they used to watch the Kardashians, and they wanted to be the Kardashians. But are we prepared to put in the work that they did, or maybe didn't do? But, are we prepared to sacrifice what we want to achieve, that lifestyle? So it's like, you have to sacrifice. Everything has a cost in this world. And so me personally, I wanted to sacrifice now for the life that I always wanted to live. I wanted to achieve a certain level of lifestyle. And I didn't have to be like the Kardashians. I don't need that. I just want to be able to pay my bills and live pretty good and be very happy with what I do. But it's got to take some work. So, the Netflix binge watching on the weekends, that shit's got to go. You got to take these things seriously. Watching Love and Hip Hop, watching some, American Idol, if people watch that anymore, I don't know. I don't watch much TV because I am working. I'm working on building 3 to 4 businesses, and we might be procuring another business in 6 months. So I'm working around the clock, and I'm okay with sacrificing not seeing, whatever show it is, not seeing whatever movie it is. I'm okay with that because I know down the road, if I put in that hard work and I'm committed to it, some good things will happen. But there's a price to pay for everything. And either you stay where you're at, and if you don't feel valued and you don't feel, that you are appreciated, well then you gotta take it. Or you start to figure out how to go. The ball just lies in your court, and it's up to you. I personally would not want to stay in a position, I would not want to stay in a situation that caused me that much stress and grief, and I didn't feel valued. It's like being in a relationship with somebody. If they are constantly cheating on you, are they going to stop if you stay? So we perpetuate this cycle. We allow it to happen, and if you don't feel appreciated at work, then it's up to you on some level to make some sort of decision and commitment to yourself. And that includes valuing yourself. and understanding what your worth is. And I don't know if we do that, enough. But at some point, you got to make that decision. You got to wake up. And your job is not going to define who you are, and it's not going to fulfill you. You have to do that for yourself. And a lot of the times, it's exploring those plan Bs. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's selling candles or making them on the weekend, but you can turn it into a full-time gig down the road. I know too many entrepreneurs that I talk to on a weekly basis that have done just that. So hopefully this gets you to think. It's not to bash on, corporate America or anything like that. It's actually just to wake people up and get them to think a different sort of way. Because that's what it took for me to actually go after my dreams and turn some side hustles into something where I can potentially make money. So that is the vlog for this period. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got something out of it. But just please listen to some of the things and take a look around you and try to figure out your plan B. I'll see you next time.